in a structural change and not just a cyclical change. Low commodity prices are probably here to stay for a while, but really the reflection of that structural change, it's coming from China's transition from being an investment and export-led economy to being one led by consumption and by services, and that transition is really reverberating around the world, and Kazakhstan is not immune to that, so we can expect a very different external environment going forward. At the same time, Kazakhstan is here in a geographical crossroads, Russia to the north, between Europe and China, and then also the sort of emerging large countries of India, and then perhaps later on Iran just to the south. So that's been true for a long time. One challenge that we've talked about today is how can Kazakhstan effectively link in to those growing economies? And then secondly, is it enough just to be a transit hub? How can Kazakhstan sort of add some extra value to those things? And a third key challenge I think that we've come across is the need for a transition within Kazakhstan from a top-down to a bottom-up approach. Kazakhstan has had a lot of success over the last few decades with a very state-led approach to development. There are some reasons why we think that might not be so successful in the coming decades. At the same time, making that transition from a top-down to a bottom-up across the whole country in politics, in business, in economic management, we know is not going to be without challenges, and we'll certainly have a few bumps along that route. So Jeffrey, there's some of our key kind of concepts we've been talking about today. I mean, you have a big background in economic geography, and so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about Kazakhstan's kind of position in this strategic nexus and what can be done to maximize the productivity gains from those connections.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Sounds like a great discussion. Was Xavier actually here? Xavier Salani-Martin? He's on the program.
Yes.
A student of mine. So
he was here.
You probably heard, although a student from a long time ago, so I'm always interested to hear what
he gave us the top 7 things an economy needs to do to be creative.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, very good. Okay. I also want to start with an advertisement. I'm very happy to be with you because whenever I go any place, and that's almost every day, actually, literally, the first thing I do is download the country report of the EIU because that's absolutely the quickest way to get up to date, reliable, authoritative, very important. I did it for Kazakhstan also, so great. I will just repeat what I learned from you.
Well, please, everybody subscribe to our reports. But there's the author of the Kazakhstan report.
Oh, very good. Thank you very much. Excellent job. So very, very happy to be with you. Thank you for mentioning economic geography because while I'm in an endless debate with Professor Asimoglu, who was here, I think, early in the day, who doesn't agree with me, I believe economic geography it's not quite destiny, but it's very, very important. And every economy needs to understand its place in the world. Not that that place is predetermined, but definitely its neighborhood shapes fundamental realities. But another lesson of economic geography is that the realities change as technology changes. So it's never geography by itself. It's geography in a world of changing technology. Because the meaning of geography for an economy depends on how technology interacts with that physical geography. You know, having a lot of oil, for example, before there was an internal combustion engine invented in the 1870s didn't make any difference. Or having oil before it was possible to discover the oil makes no difference. So for this region, this of course is one of the pivot points of human history, which makes Kazakhstan and Central Asia an absolutely fascinating place from the point of view of thinking about the economy. And it is, of course, true that Central Asia played a pivotal role in human history for about 2,000 years, from maybe 500 BC to 1500, an absolutely central role in the drama of human history, because many of the greatest conquerors of the world came out of this region. And it's a little bit puzzling on first glance why that is. Why did Genghis Khan have the biggest empire in the history of the world, the biggest land empire? Because there weren't all that many people in Mongolia that would be able to conquer a region that went all the way to Hungary, for example, in this giant empire. And the answer, I think, fundamentally is geography and technology. This region had the world's best military technology and the world's best transport technology for nearly 2,000 years, called the horse. So this is the region that domesticated the horse. You have enough grass to feed the armies, and horse-based empires, which were Kazakh or Hun or Mongol empires, had a profound military advantage over the rest of the world. If you wanted to go fast and far, up to around 1500, there was, and certainly on land, there was only one way to do it. And that was on horseback or maybe on camelback. And that was the specialty of Central Asia. And so, despite small populations, there were large conquests and large empires. And when you think about it, historians talk about this region as being the only highway system of the whole world. You know how transport was in North America during that period, in Native America. The Native Americans made a big, big mistake, just to make a digression, 10,000 years ago, when Asians came across to North America from the Bering Straits. They made a huge mistake. They slaughtered all the horses. So they drove the North American horses to extinction. And then you know what? They walked for the next 10,000 years, because there were literally no animals to ride in North America. And then the Spaniards showed up on horseback and defeated the Native Americans. So technology and geography, in my view, are extremely important. Well, one of the decisive events for this region, of course, was 1498. In 1498, a Portuguese sailor, using the help of Arab seamen, was able to go from Portugal to India by sea. And that, I think, in a way, was the end, although it took another century, the end of the Silk Road. Because all of the overland transport from Asia to Europe and back, up until 1500, was more or less land-based, because ocean-based trade was simply technologically not possible. And then Vasco da Gama, in 1498, after 100 years of navigational expertise, circled the Cape of Good Hope, made his way to the Malabar coast, and then sea-based trade dominated. And land-based, landlocked regions of the world, of which Central Asia is the most landlocked in a sense because it's the farthest from the oceans, went into decline. And the next step for this region was seeing Russian armies come to invade and conquer this region in the 17th and 18th centuries. And it was really only in effect 25 years ago, and I was happy to be here at that point when this country regained its independence. Now, Central Asia was for a very long time mainly characterized economically by its landlockedness and its distance from trade, because when sea-based trade became the organizing principle for the international economy, a region like this one had a very, very difficult time participating. And it didn't really participate. This was a very poor country of nomadic herdsmen for much of the modern history. The Russian occupation, or the Russian conquest, and then the Soviet era was quite brutal, of course, with a lot of deaths and forced sedentarism. And the next phase for this region actually, I think, was the minerals and the hydrocarbons period. Because one thing about hydrocarbons is that they don't care about transport costs. Oil and gas are so valuable, and the oil companies are so tough that they'll go anywhere. I'm really impressed by the oil industry in a certain sense, because they will go to the ends of the earth, to the Arctic, to the ultra deep sea, to the middle of the rainforest to get oil. And then they'll build pipelines to get it out. And if there's any opposition, they'll overthrow governments, and they'll create wars. They'll do anything for the oil. It's a very impressive industry, in a way. Very, very tough. And it played its role because the hydrocarbons in this region were a great fuel for economic growth, and they have played an important role for Kazakhstan. It's not the only thing, but it is part of the explanation why, despite the difficulties of trade, the history of this region, the difficulties of coming out of the Soviet economy in the Soviet era, there was a very good period of the last 20 years of development for Kazakhstan with good leadership, because without good leadership, you can't use these advantages. But good leadership without resources of some kind is also very tough. So if you're landlocked but you don't have oil, it's really pretty hard. If you're landlocked with good leadership and with hydrocarbons, you can make quite a bit, and this country has made a big advance. It's actually a quite well-to-do country in average living standards, and it's made a very big advance in reducing poverty and building a solid infrastructure and an education structure and so on. So now we have another problem, however. And the problem is that the hydrocarbon era, in my opinion, will come to a close. Not immediately, but over the next 40 or 50 years. I do believe this. In other words, I believe that the climate change imperative is real, important, and though it looks politically uncertain whether the oil industry or the renewable industry will win in the end, I believe it will be the low-carbon energy system that will win. And the reason I believe it is that the climate change is really serious. And it's already happening enough that all over the world, governments and society is seeing this is not a joke. And therefore, we had last December the signing of the Paris Climate Agreement, which 196 signatories unanimously agreed to say that we would move to a zero net emission world economy in the second half of the 21st century. That's an amazing statement. And the politics of that are not easy. And the technology of that is not easy. But the politics are not easy because if you happen to be an oil producer, like Russia, or like the United States, or like Canada, or like Australia, or like the Gulf countries, or like Kazakhstan, This is not a pleasant message. Who wants to be told that the resource base, which is so big and so valuable, is actually a problem, not a solution? Nobody likes to hear that. And yet the countries signed this agreement. Why did they sign it? In my view, they signed it because they know that the problem is so serious that they can't completely play political games with it. In my country, one political party still plays political games with it. The Republican Party is funded by the oil industry. And so the oil industry tells them, don't say anything about climate change. And they don't. And they say it's a hoax, it's not real, we'll repeal the legislation, we won't do anything. But don't believe them. Because the American public, for example, by a margin of 70% to 30% says we need to take action against human-made climate change. And that kind of opinion is worldwide. I mention that because I do think this is a very serious problem for Kazakhstan. Not a light problem, not something that is just going away. And I know that the government also recognizes this because there really is a big effort to move to a green economy and to a diversified economy. But it puts in question this geography question. What is Central Asia's new role? If it's not the horse, if it's not, which was good for 2,000 years, by the way, if it's not oil, what's the next thing? And here I do personally believe that there are two interlocked phenomena which are really positive. But a little bit tricky, but very positive. One is the information revolution, which of course is pervasive. And the beautiful thing about the information revolution is that it really is our first pure non-geography technology. You can be anywhere essentially and get your email, be on the phone, get your GPS, and do business, and there's no such thing as distance because the speed of light is faster than we are, so it doesn't really matter where you are. It's a great equalizer. So to the extent that information technology underpins production, logistics, entertainment, education, healthcare, and so on, it is a geography beater, which is good for everybody. And it's a wonderful suite of technologies. So that, I think, is one part. The second that I find absolutely fundamental, I think everybody does, is the rise of China as what I believe will be the world's largest economy and a technologically dynamic economy. The whole fact that China is poor is, of course, another historical oddity, because China was the world leader for at least 1,000 years in technology and everything, and then China made its own terrible policy mistake, probably the worst policy decision of the last 1,000 years. And that was to stop its ocean-based navigation in 1433, when the Admiral Cheng He stopped his great navigations because the Ming Empire decided that it was too much focused on its internal troubles and would stop the ocean going. And China turned protectionist, basically, stopped its international trade, went into 600 years of decline, or 500 years, and itself only started to come out of that in the last half century. But now, with China's boom, I think this changes everything for Central Asia also. Because if you put together the fact that East Asia, in particular Northeast Asia, China, Japan, and Korea, added together, is the world's biggest economic market. bigger than the United States, bigger than North America, bigger than European Union. And it's only going to get bigger and bigger, I think. And then you say that on the other side of Eurasia is the major market of Europe. Being in the middle of that with modern technology is pretty good, actually. Central Asia is not abandoned to sea-based trade as it was for 300 years. Central Asia will be on a land-based crossroads of trade. And China has it right, in my view, when it talks about its One Belt, One Road strategy. The One Belt, One Road strategy, as you know, the belt means the new Silk Road over land between East Asia and Western Europe, and the road is the maritime connection between China and Europe going through Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and into Europe, or the northern route across the northern passage to Rotterdam, now that the ice is gone from the northern sea route. But China's, I think, is determined to build an efficient, rapid, high-speed, interconnected, sophisticated corridor over land between China and Europe as a fundamental part of an economic and political and geopolitical strategy. And that puts Kazakhstan as a major node of massive trade between two huge markets. And that, I think, brings back the Silk Road, period, because that's what the Silk Road was. But now the Silk Road overland, I think, will be able to compete in many, many ways with the ocean-based trade. So my view is that the rise of China is of course, it's a world transformer, but I think it's a transformer also for Central Asia in terms of economic integration, because I do think there will essentially be, over the next 30 or 40 years, an economic corridor that stretches from East Asia to Europe. And Kazakhstan, being the best developed, the most advanced, the best governed country of Central Asia, has a chance to really make itself the hub of that corridor in an important way. For example, the building of a Central Asian financial market, which is one of these strategies. The building of transport logistics hub, which is one of the strategies. The building of an industrial base here, which can serve both Europe and China in processing many minerals, whole mining sector in this country, agricultural products, and many, many other products. So that, to my mind, is the most basic part of the economic geography. And I find it optimistic. Of course, if China were to go into deep crisis, this would not be a proper assessment that I'm making, but I'm optimistic about China's long-term continued growth. Also, another risk for this region is a barrier that comes by new conflict and Cold War between Europe and Russia. And of course, those risks have been evident in the last 5 years with the Ukraine crisis, the Georgia crisis, and so forth. I find this very irresponsible on both sides. And I put a lot of blame on the United States of provoking some of this confrontation. And I think from an economic point of view, it's extremely important that both sides get back to the job of Russia being well integrated into this massive Eurasian space, both with Europe and with China. right now, it's not working because of a sanctions regime, a confrontation, a lot of propaganda in both sides that is very irresponsible and dangerous in my view. And I think that part of my own economic strategy would be to try to heal this breach that came between Western Europe, the United States on one side, and Russia, which I think was really provoked mainly by the NATO expansion, which was a very bad policy of the United States, a very unwise foreign policy. But then it escalated in both directions, and it's become quite dangerous and quite hazardous for the economic future of Russia, and quite damaging for everybody's economic future, and that causes ramifications for Central Asia as well. So my view is an optimistic one that, and I remember it because I was Boris Yeltsin's economic advisor, one of them in 1991. And the idea then truly was an economic market that stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And there wasn't an idea of a new Cold War or new divisions. This was going to be one economically integrated and politically friendly, not just neutral, but friendly space. And we got off track, but I think we can get back on track and really find it extremely important to do so. A final word about what I think would be the right strategy for Kazakhstan in this context. First, I think this country does it very well. Be friends with everybody. You know, be friends with China, be friends with Russia, be friends with Europe, be friends with the United States, because that's natural and I think actually quite important, especially to play a bridging role. A bridging role means not choosing sides, but bridging sides. And I think that that is the foreign policy, and it's a very wise one and a very effective one. Second, work very consciously on that bridge building and infrastructure. So encourage the One Belt, One Road idea, engage with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, become an early client and borrower from that bank. Third, make the transition consciously to a new energy economy, because waiting for this, hoping that hydrocarbons will somehow continue to come through, would not be a prudent approach for the long term. And not that they're going to go away immediately, but fortunately, this country and Central Asia as a region has vast renewable energy resources. You have a lot of sunshine, enough sunshine to power a lot of the planet. You have a lot of wind power. You have a lot of other energy alternatives, so I would develop those actively. And the fourth point that I would make, and the fourth and final point, is that whatever is done for Kazakhstan to achieve its goal of becoming a high-income, prosperous economy and society, which is possible, requires a tremendous investment in education, in skills, and in technology. That is fundamental. And Kazakhstan's on the way, but there is a long way to go. And I'm very happy that new major universities like Nazarbayev University are being built and are being fostered, because that's extremely important. And I would make strong connections between your universities and Chinese universities, European universities, American universities, all of them. Student exchanges, faculty exchanges, joint programs, mixed degree programs, and so forth, because this is also going to be key for the technology development and technology diffusion. And the final thing I would say is the government should invest more in research and development in this country, because the science and technology budget is not adequate for the next step of diversified, high technology economy. And that requires both private sector investment and government investment together. So those are just some basic ideas, but I do see it in the context of economic geography, and in this case, I find the geography exciting and positive. Thank you very much.